Bangladesh is a country rich in many culture and people of different nations. Indigenous people have been living here for centuries. They have rich culture, music, tradition, histories, lively dances, social festivals where they take part together. But their culture and way of life are at risk now.
For far too long, the hopes and aspirations of indigenous peoples have been ignored. Their lands have been taken, their cultures denigrated or directly attacked, their languages and customs suppressed, their wisdom and traditional knowledge overlooked, and their sustainable ways of developing natural resources dismissed. Some have even faced the threat of extinction. Indigenous peoples continue to suffer from prejudice and ill will. In many cases, they are trapped in the middle of conflicts, conscripted into armed forces, faced with summary executions and relocated from their lands. They are subject to extreme poverty, disease, environmental destruction, and sometimes permanent displacement.
There are an estimated 370 million indigenous people living in approximately 70 countries in the world, mainly in developing countries. They have diverse culture, traditions, and languages, and are among the poorest and most disadvantaged, living, as they often do, in remote isolated hills, mountain, and forest areas. They are also often marginalized from socio-economic and political processes that affect their well-being and their lives, and hardly ever have rights over lands and their territories.
Now, the culture of land ownership of indigenous peoples should be respected, the traditional land rights of indigenous peoples, and government should form a special commission to protect the land rights of indigenous peoples. Government can also take some special measures, positive special measures for the economic and social development of indigenous peoples in Bangladesh.
In Bangladesh, there are 45 different indigenous communities and their population is about 3 million. They are the main victims of violations of human rights. Indigenous people have been struggling to protest their rights, right to land, forest, and natural resources. Today, indigenous people are losing their lands and their rights to forest are being ignored. Their culture are being treated as inferior. Indigenous women are facing double discrimination on the basis of their race and gender. In the past, many indigenous villages had been destroyed and they were evicted from lands. They were helpless and many of them migrated to India for safety. Those who remained in the country had become helpless.
We must address the special situation of indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples are fighting for inclusion. Our spiritual relationship to the land and nature must be respected. Our children and youth should be protected by the law and should live long lives free from poverty, hunger and discrimination. Let us all listen to the voices of indigenous peoples and act their partners to protect indigenous peoples' rights. There is a need for awareness raising campaigns for the general public to learn about and respect indigenous peoples.
Now, indigenous people of Bangladesh are trying to raise their voices about their fundamental human rights. They are organizing social and cultural movements and actions to assert their rights at national level. In 2001, Bangladesh government took a project called Eco Park to establish parks on the land of Kashis and Garos. Government did not consult with the local indigenous people before taking the Eco Park project. Even the forest department treated the indigenous people as illegal inhabitants of the forest. More than 1,000 Kashi and Garo families faced forceful eviction from their ancestral homeland. Indigenous people of Bangladesh organized protest rallies, movement and campaigns against the project. They raised their voices that they did not want Eco Park on their land. Indigenous people ran advocacy programs to get supports from civil society, NGOs, media and other groups. Finally, government could not implement the Eco Park project. In Madhupur forest, Garo leaders were killed by the police and forest department during the struggle to protect their land rights. No justice was made in favor of indigenous people.
Indigenous people do not destroy the forest, and the profit destroys the forest. How other people see the forest for their own benefit.
Measure is supporting to strengthen the initiative of indigenous people in Bangladesh. It supports for promotion of human rights of indigenous people and defending culture diversity at national level. There is a little hope now. Indigenous people are at least becoming united to raise their voices at local, national, even at international level. Lack of leadership and organizational capacity are one of the major challenges for their struggle. They are seeking for support in their struggle of recognizing indigenous people as people equal in dignity and rights. The main challenge of indigenous people of Bangladesh is the lack of constitutional recognition and right to self-determination.
And when the last river is dead, then people will know that they cannot survive and they cannot eat silver and gold. We need rivers, we need forest, we need mountains, we need hills. So indigenous peoples are the main protectors of these hills, mountains, rivers and nature. This should be respected. And if we respect this worldview of indigenous peoples, we can protect the nature. We all know that now human being is facing serious problem with nature, with climate change. We are facing Sidor, we are facing tsunami, earthquakes and natural disasters. So this indicates that we did not respect indigenous people's way of life.
lack of land rights is the survival point for indigenous people. Without land, indigenous people cannot survive.